Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a book that one of you mentioned and which I've been meaning to talk about for quite some time. It's A Heart at Fire's Center. That's the title. The Life and Music of Bernard Herrmann by Stephen C. Smith. It's one of the great artist biographies. It's just tremendously well done, fabulously researched, and oh my goodness, what a terrific person to write about. It's a difficult topic because he was crazy. He was really an ornery, contradictory person, full of insecurities and contradictions, and oh my gosh, it's fantastic stuff. The book won the Deems Taylor Award. It originally came out. It has a new preface in this version. So it's been around for quite a while. 2002, 2001. It was 1991 was when it was published. Goodness gracious. It is without question the I hate to use the word definitive, but at the moment it is the definitive biography of Bernard Herrmann. And what a person worth biographizing. Wow, baby. You learn so much about basically just like everything, like the American music scene from the 1920s all the way through the 1970s. And Herrmann was in the thick of everything as a composer, as a conductor, as a magpie, as every wow, what a thing. What is there to say about this that's like so amazing? Well, Herrmann, of course, is known for his film scores as one of the great film scorists, possibly the greatest of the 20th century in many respects. And we'll talk about that in a little bit because he had a very, very interesting vision of what film music ought to be. It's worth getting to know when you hear his music. But, most of his work actually was not done in film. It was done in radio in the 1930s and 40s, in that period, working for CBS. And there is tons and tons and tons and tons of music that he wrote to illustrate radio dramas. Some of that, one of them has been recorded by Joseph Horowitz and his crew, the Whitman program, but there are tons more, just tons more. And of course, he wrote for the Twilight Zone and for the Alfred Hitchcock Presents and all kinds of other things as well for television. But his radio stuff is the vast majority of what he wrote. There are concert works, of course. There's his symphony and the string quartet and the clarinet quintet, Souvenir de Voyage, and other smaller orchestral works, and the cantata Moby Dick, and the rather dull opera Wuthering Heights, about which Stephen Smith is extremely honest. His assessments of the music, I have to say, for all the films are as spot on as his description of Herrmann's life. He's really a wonderful biographer. He has obvious sympathy for his subject, but he doesn't gild the lily. And you can't with somebody like Herrmann because he was just irrationally angry at just about everybody and everything. Notwithstanding which, he managed to be married 3 times. Although not surprisingly, he was married 3 times. And I just find that the whole story to be absolutely fascinating. It is not the usual, artist biography, and especially sings, and then I sang at La Scala, then I did this. There is such a story here of the man and his relationships to the world of music, his unbelievably high standards for himself and for everybody around him. And the fact that they were inconsistently high standards and not everybody could rise to them caused a lot of the friction in his life. But his life was nothing but friction, and he died young. He had a heart condition, as it turned out, and he was dead at the age of, I think, about 64. So a really unbelievable story, a truly incredible story. I think, on the whole, that we still have so much to discover about this guy. We really do. Not just because there's so much music that's unplayed, but also the kind of music that it is. And this is where we get to Herrmann's view of what film music was. And to a certain extent, this applies to his radio scores as well. He spent much of his career working on what he called melodrama. We would add an A to it, melodrama, the mixing of text as spoken word and music. And in his view, a film score, here's the paradox. It's the paradox at the heart of a lot of film music. On the one hand, he believed that the music should never draw attention to itself. On the other hand, he believed that a good score is one of the linchpins of a great film, even though it doesn't draw attention to itself. That might sound paradoxical, but it isn't when we listen to the music separately. He was not like, for example, Shostakovich, a composer who wrote in closed forms, so that each piece had its own individual existence apart from the film, or at least a shape. He was interested entirely in supporting what was happening on screen. And just as important as to where he put music was where he did not put music. When you hired Bernard Herrmann to score a film, you got a partner, and a very difficult and cantankerous partner. But he had very, very strong views about what music could and could not do and should not do within the context of the film. And a lot of directors, as he constantly complained, wanted either total control over everything or couldn't have cared less about, where the music was, as long as they had some. He thought that Stanley Kubrick's, 2001 Space Odyssey was the height of vulgarity, because nothing could be more stupid than, having the Blue Danube Waltz as you're flying to the moon. Because his view was, if people recognize the music, then they're just going to listen to the music. They're not going to care about what's happening on screen. And he was right. I mean, he really was right to a large degree. Unless, 2001 Space Odyssey is a wonderful example of that, because you do pay more attention to the music that you know when you hear it, and you're less concerned about what's happening on the screen. And it's only when, for example, Kubrick uses Ligeti and people who you just don't know normally, avant-garde type music, that you think that it simply supports the imagery coming through. And Herrmann's music does exactly that. It is extraordinarily specific. He believed that each film should have its own color, its own ensemble, that you didn't have to use a conventional orchestra. He loved using weird instruments, and lots of them, to create an absolutely distinctive sound for each film. And that's the fascinating thing about him. His music is so remarkable, so remarkably him, and so incredibly colorful and atmospheric that you do want to listen to it separately. But when you do, you often realize that it's lacking something that must have been supplied by the pictures on screen. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to talk about and to think about and to consider. His career had its ups and downs. He made his fortune in the 30s and 40s doing his initial film scores, and also the stuff he did for CBS, on which he received royalties all his life. So he was financially comfortable, and he could pick and choose among the projects he wanted to do, so he wasn't the most prolific. But on the other hand, by the 1960s, Hollywood was looking for pop songs. They wanted their movies to make money by selling the score, selling the soundtrack, and it had to be popular. And of course, Herrmann, who was nothing but, if not an elitist, I mean, he wished he had been a member of the British nobility. He thought that whole concept was just atrocious and outrageous, and he was never going to write pop songs. And so his career took a dive throughout the 1960s because he wasn't writing the kind of music that Hollywood wanted. But then in the 1970s, he was rediscovered by, a whole generation of new directors, by Martin Scorsese and Brian De Palma. And for that reason, he was able to, make a comeback. And when he finally died in 1964, he was in huge demand for everything except as a conductor, which is what he really wanted to be. He was not a very good conductor. He really wasn't. He spent much of his career as a conductor, especially in his radio days, conducting the CBS orchestra and all kinds of interesting repertoire. He loved all the weird composers. He did Delius and Cyril Scott and premieres of Darius Milhaud's The Creation of the World. And just an amazing, amazing career. that he had at the beginning of his life, particularly. But although he made some recordings, some of them are good, some of them are less good, he was not by nature a conductor. And of course, he didn't get along with anybody, so that was a problem too. But at the end of his life, the very end of his life, he had a totally full schedule. He was supposed to do Carrie. Wouldn't that have been fun if he'd managed to do the Stephen King novel? But it didn't work out that way. He was at absolute the peak of his form. And remarkably, he finished the recording sessions for Taxi Driver, his late score, and his last score, pardon me. And then he went to sleep and never woke up. And that was it. He died of congestive heart failure on Christmas Eve, actually. It was in 1975, I think. Just an amazing life. It's an amazing life, and it's an amazing story. And there's so much to learn and discover and talk about and ponder. And it's all laid out in crystalline prose, beautifully written, logically assembled, fabulously well researched. Just an amazing work. One of the great works of musical biography, I think. So kudos to Stephen C. Smith, who wrote this now, 30 years ago. Unbelievable. But an extraordinary story, and a book that anybody who cares about music, forget whether you like film music or not, or it's just a story you need to read, because it's there's nothing like it. Nothing like it in the world of contemporary music or the arts more generally. He was a comet that blazed across the heavens and then fizzled out. Wow. Keep on listening, friends, and reading. Take care.